I never thought an ordinary Tuesday would change the way I looked at my own family. The sun was just peeking over the horizon, painting the bus depot in soft orange light, when I sat on a bench, waiting for my shuttle to the grocery store. The air smelled faintly of gasoline and fresh asphalt, a scent I had grown accustomed to over the years. That's when I overheard it. My ears, sharp as ever, caught a familiar voice. Rachel, my niece, talking to someone I didn't recognize. At first I tried to ignore it, chalking it up to idle chatter. But the words sliced through my calm morning like a knife. She won't remember for long. Once she's out of it, the house is ours, Rachel said, her tone conspiratorial, almost gleeful. My heart stopped. I felt my hands grow clammy as the world around me faded. My niece, my family, was plotting to take my home while I was supposedly not in my right mind. The betrayal was immediate and personal. I had raised her, tucked her in when she was sick, celebrated birthdays and holidays, and yet here she was, casually discussing how to steal what was mine. I left the bus depot without buying groceries, my mind racing with possibilities. I couldn't confront her directly, not yet. I needed a plan, something clever and safe. That night, I researched smart locks, security alerts, and home monitoring systems. I wanted protection that didn't just keep people out. It would alert me and the authorities if someone tried to cross the line. The following week, I installed the new smart lock. It was sleek, modern, and fully integrated with a silent alarm system. I memorized every function, every alert, and most importantly, I set up a special code. A code that, if used, would silently notify the police and send me an immediate alert on my phone. Then came the hardest part, giving Rachel access. She needed it to maintain the pretense, to think she was still in the know. I handed her a code with a polite smile, watching her nod, completely unaware that it was a trap she couldn't escape. Days passed, and I moved through my routines with a quiet vigilance. I tended my garden, baked bread, and went to the market. All the while, I imagined her planning, scheming, waiting for the right moment to act. It was almost comforting to know that when the moment came, the trap was already set, and then I waited. Patience, I reminded myself, was part of the strategy. I had survived decades, faced life's disappointments, and I wasn't about to be blindsided in my own home. Rachel's ambition and greed had underestimated one crucial factor. I was smarter than they thought. The night was still, moonlight spilling through the windows, casting familiar shadows across the hardwood floors. Somewhere out there, Rachel was plotting her next move, unaware that her plan had already been foiled. I sipped my tea, feeling a mixture of sadness and quiet satisfaction. I had prepared, and soon, justice would arrive without a word, without confrontation. Sometimes, I realized, the cleverest way to protect what you love is to wait and let the world reveal its own consequences. And in that quiet, I knew the night ahead would be the turning point. The days after the smart lock installation were a strange mix of normalcy and tension. I moved through my home with quiet vigilance, baking bread, tending my garden, and reading by the window, all while imagining Rachel lurking somewhere, plotting her next move. The idea that she believed she had the upper hand made my calm feel like a shield, a quiet, controlled satisfaction that she couldn't sense. I watched from my window as she occasionally strolled past the house, pretending to be casual. Sometimes she paused at the corner, glancing toward my windows, her tote bag dangling from her arm. She didn't know I could see her. I let her linger, each step, each glance, building the illusion that she still had access, that she could act whenever she pleased. Meanwhile, the smart lock hummed quietly in the background, a silent sentinel. I checked the monitoring system daily, making minor adjustments, ensuring every alert would reach me instantly. The trap was precise, careful, and invisible. One afternoon, I ran errands in town, pretending oblivion while my mind constantly replayed that conversation at the bus depot. The betrayal lingered in a corner of my mind like a shadow. How could someone I had cared for, nurtured and trusted, discuss stealing my home as if it were a game? The thought made my stomach twist, but it also sharpened my resolve. I decided to use patience as my ally. I left small signs for her to see: lights on at unusual times, doors locked and unlocked, shadows moving through the house. All part of the illusion that the house was mine, but just barely. She needed to believe she could act. She needed to believe she had a chance. Nights were the hardest. I brewed chamomile tea and sat by the window, watching the moonlight spill across my living room. I imagined her checking, testing, planning. I reminded myself that revenge was not my goal. Justice, protection, and foresight were. I didn't need confrontation. The plan was already in motion. One evening, I noticed movement near the driveway. My heart quickened, but I remained calm. The smart lock alerted me immediately, a subtle vibration on my phone that told me she had entered the code. I didn't move. I didn't panic. I simply waited. The police, silent and efficient, were already on their way. Rachel's plan, which she thought would succeed so easily, was about to collapse without her realizing it. I sipped my tea, a quiet smile forming. Sometimes, the cleverest action is inaction, letting others reveal themselves and letting the consequences unfold naturally. The night held a sharp tension, the kind that only comes before something inevitable. I leaned back in my chair, knowing that soon I would no longer have to imagine her plotting. Soon the plan would conclude, and I would finally reclaim my sense of safety, not just in my home, but in the trust I had carefully rebuilt around it. The night finally arrived. The house was quiet, bathed in the silver glow of moonlight filtering through the curtains. I had prepared for this moment for weeks, yet my heart still beat faster than I expected. I made a fresh cup of tea, placed it on the table beside me, and sat in my favorite chair, cane resting against the arm. The smart lock hummed softly in the background, silent but vigilant, like a guardian waiting for the right moment. Minutes felt like hours. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of leaves outside my window made me tense, yet I remained calm. This was not fear. It was anticipation, a patient readiness born of careful planning. Then I heard it. A faint, deliberate approach near the front door. Footsteps, slow and cautious, but unmistakably hers. Rachel had arrived. She was carrying the tote bag she always carried, probably imagining she was about to execute her plan flawlessly. Little did she know, every move she made was being observed, logged, and silently relayed to the authorities. I took a deep breath, letting the weight of the months of preparation settle in. This was the moment I had envisioned, the moment when patience and cleverness would triumph over betrayal. I didn't need to shout, to confront, or to fear. I only needed to wait. The front door made a faint click as she entered the code. The smart lock responded exactly as I had designed. A soft notification appeared on my phone, confirming not only her entry attempt, but also triggering a silent alert to the local police. Minutes passed. She moved through the doorway, unaware that she was stepping into a net she could not escape. I sipped my tea calmly, watching the shadows stretch across the floor. And then, as if out of nowhere, the sound of footsteps echoed from the porch outside, different from hers, authoritative and purposeful. Police officers, silent and ready, were already at the door. Rachel froze mid-step. Her face turned pale, eyes wide with disbelief and sudden fear. I didn't move. I didn't intervene. I simply watched, as the consequences of her actions unfolded naturally. The trap I had carefully laid was complete, and she was caught not by confrontation, but by foresight and calm vigilance. The police spoke softly, instructing her to step outside. She hesitated, glancing back at the house she had schemed to claim, and finally complied, her pride and confidence replaced by shame and terror. I felt a mixture of relief and sorrow. Relief that my home was safe, my boundaries respected. Sorrow that a family bond had been so easily fractured by greed and entitlement. Yet deep down, I knew that justice had been served without cruelty, and that sometimes the cleverest protection is preparation, patience, and letting the world reveal the truth. That night, I sipped the last of my tea, the hum of the smart lock in the background, a comforting reminder. My home was mine, my life intact, and the lesson had been delivered, not with anger, but with quiet precision. The morning after, the house felt lighter. The air was crisp with the scent of spring, birds chirping in the garden as if nothing had happened, yet everything had changed. I moved through my rooms with a quiet calm, brewing tea and preparing breakfast, the hum of the smart lock a gentle reminder of last night's events. I didn't gloat. I didn't celebrate. The justice had been served silently, efficiently, and now it was time to reflect. Rachel's betrayal had cut deeper than I had anticipated, but her capture had restored more than my safety. It had reaffirmed my own vigilance, my ability to protect what was mine without anger or rash decisions. The town was abuzz quietly, neighbors whispering about what had occurred. Some approached me cautiously, offering kind words. "I heard everything turned out safely," one said. "You handled that cleverly, Mrs. Thompson." I smiled politely, acknowledging their concern but not discussing details. Some things, I reminded myself, are best kept private. I found myself thinking about Rachel. What drove her to such audacity? Entitlement? Greed? Or perhaps a lack of understanding of the consequences her actions might carry? Whatever the reason, she had underestimated me, and that miscalculation had led her here, caught and exposed. Later, I ventured into the garden, pulling weeds and trimming the lavender. The physical labor grounded me, helping me process the mix of emotions swirling inside. Relief was strongest, but beneath it lay a quiet sorrow. A family bond had been fractured, and though justice had been achieved, the emotional remnants lingered. The police had already spoken with her, giving her a stern but professional warning. No arrests were necessary beyond formalities, but the point had been made. Boundaries were not negotiable, and deception carried consequences. I didn't need to witness the aftermath. I trusted the law to deliver the lesson. As the sun climbed higher, I caught a glimpse of Rachel walking down the street, shoulders slumped, her usual air of confidence replaced with humility. She avoided looking directly at my house, a silent acknowledgement of her failed plan. Part of me felt pity, part of me felt cautious hope. Perhaps this experience would teach her something lasting, an understanding of respect, boundaries, and the weight of her choices. That evening, I sat by the window with a cup of tea, reflecting on what had transpired. My home remained intact, my boundaries respected, and the world outside, though aware of my niece's intentions, now recognized the wisdom of patience and foresight. I whispered to myself, sometimes the quietest actions carry the loudest lessons. The house was peaceful again, but my mind remained alert. Trust had been tested and boundaries enforced, yet life continued. And in that continuation, I found the balance between vigilance and calm, preparation and serenity. The days following Rachel's failed attempt were quiet, but the atmosphere was charged with subtle tension. I moved through my home with a newfound ease, yet my eyes still lingered on the garden gate, or the corners of the yard, attuned to any unexpected movement. The smart lock, now a familiar presence, hummed softly, a reminder that vigilance had its reward. Rachel's behavior changed noticeably. She no longer lingered near my property, her usual boldness replaced by hesitancy. I saw her walking past on the sidewalk, head down, her tote bag swinging nervously. The town murmured quietly about her transformation. "She's acting different," neighbors whispered. "Seems humbled." I did not rush to judgment. I had learned that change, if genuine, manifests slowly. Patience had been my ally once, and it would remain so now. I observed quietly, letting her actions speak louder than any confrontation ever could. One afternoon I noticed her helping Mrs. Collins carry groceries. She smiled politely without expectation or need for recognition. There was a careful mindfulness in her movements, a humility I had never seen before. My heart stirred, not with forgiveness, not yet, but with cautious acknowledgement that she was learning consequences the hard way. At home, I returned to my routines, baking bread, tending the garden, and reading quietly by the window, all the ordinary tasks that had become my sanctuary. The tension that once filled the rooms had lifted slightly, replaced by a measured calm. I realized that protecting myself did not require constant fear. It required clear boundaries and awareness, paired with patience for life to reveal its lessons. In the evenings, I watched the sun dip behind the rooftops, casting long shadows across my porch. Rachel passed by occasionally, never near enough to breach my space, but close enough to demonstrate awareness. Each step she took reinforced the lesson I had silently imparted. Actions have consequences, and respect must be earned, not assumed. I began to reflect on the power of observation and preparation. The smart lock had done more than protect my home. It had allowed me to act without confrontation, to enforce boundaries without escalation. And in seeing Rachel's gradual change, I understood another truth. Sometimes, consequences and distance teach more than direct punishment ever could. That night, I brewed chamomile tea and sat by the window. I felt a quiet satisfaction in knowing that my home, my life, and my peace were intact. Rachel had glimpsed the weight of her choices, and I had preserved the life I had built with careful planning, foresight, and patience. I whispered softly to the night, "You are learning, Rachel, and I am watching. Slowly, the lessons will settle in." The house remained calm, secure, and alive with gentle light. Outside, the world continued, unaware of the quiet justice that had been served. And inside, I felt the strength that comes from vigilance, wisdom, and self-respect. Weeks passed, and Rachel's behavior continued to shift in subtle but unmistakable ways. I saw her lending a hand at the local community garden, carefully planting seedlings and chatting politely with neighbors. There was no fanfare, no attempt to impress, just quiet effort. For the first time since the betrayal, I felt a flicker of cautious hope. I observed her from the kitchen window, my tea warming in my hand. She had once been bold, entitled, and reckless. Now, her movements were measured, deliberate. She noticed her surroundings, respected boundaries, and seemed aware of the consequences her actions carried. It was as if the failed attempt had forced a reflection she could not ignore. At home, life continued its steady rhythm. I baked bread, tended my garden, and organized my little library, each task a reminder of the stability I had fought to preserve. The smart lock, humming softly in the background, was more than a tool of security. It had become a symbol of lessons learned, both for me and for Rachel. One morning, a neighbor mentioned seeing Rachel helping an elderly man carry boxes from his car. "She seems different," the neighbor said. I nodded quietly, neither confirming nor denying. Change, I knew, could not be measured in gossip. It had to be observed firsthand. That evening, I stepped onto the porch and caught sight of Rachel at the edge of my yard. She didn't approach. She paused, straightened, and then continued down the street, respecting my space. The humility in her gesture struck me, and I realized that the lessons she had begun to absorb were taking root in ways I had hoped for, but had not dared expect. Inside, I reflected on the journey of the past months. Betrayal had taught me vigilance, preparation, and the importance of clear boundaries. Watching Rachel now, I understood that growth, even after serious mistakes, was possible. She had glimpsed the weight of consequences, and her behavior indicated she was willing to shoulder it. I brewed chamomile tea and sat by the window, letting the soft glow of the evening fill the room. I whispered quietly to myself, "This is the beginning." Slowly, Rachel is learning what it means to respect and to act responsibly. The house felt lighter, the tension of previous months giving way to a fragile calm. I realized that patience and observation could be as powerful as confrontation, and that change, if real, would reveal itself in time. For the first time in months, I felt a sense of balance return, not complete, not final, but steady enough to trust that the lessons had taken hold. Outside, the night settled over the garden, stars sparkling faintly above. Inside, I sipped my tea, feeling a quiet pride in both my own resilience and the slow, careful growth of someone I had once feared might be lost to entitlement. By now, Rachel's changes were too consistent to ignore. I began to consider giving her a small, controlled opportunity to demonstrate responsibility, a gesture that would show whether her growth was genuine or merely temporary, not trust fully, not yet, but a test of her respect for boundaries. I suggested she help with a few minor household tasks, simple things that required attention, but no authority. Watering plants, checking that the garden gates were secure, organizing a small shelf in the pantry. I gave instructions carefully, observing from a distance. The smart lock hummed quietly in the background, a silent guardian, reminding both of us that access did not mean entitlement. Rachel approached each task with an almost nervous care. She moved slowly, deliberately, pausing to make sure every plant was properly watered, every item neatly placed. Gone was the impulsiveness, replaced by mindfulness. It was as if the consequences of her previous actions had etched a new level of awareness into her daily routine. The neighbors began to notice, too. Whispers of her changed demeanor filtered through the town. "Have you seen Rachel lately? She's really careful," one said. "Seems humbled," another added. I smiled quietly to myself, aware that genuine change often spoke louder in actions than words. I didn't intervene unless necessary. I let her learn the rhythm of responsibility, offering gentle guidance only when a task risked being mismanaged. Each completed chore reinforced my cautious hope that she could, at least in small ways, honor boundaries and understand consequences. One afternoon, as I watched her from the porch, she paused and looked toward the house, her expression thoughtful. She straightened, nodded to herself, and continued her work without seeking my approval. That small gesture, the silent acknowledgement of limits, felt like a milestone. Inside, I reflected on the months that had passed. Betrayal had tested my patience, my vigilance, and my understanding of human nature. Rachel's missteps had been painful, but they had also created an opportunity for both of us to learn. She about humility and respect, I about patience and measured justice. The sun set slowly, casting warm light across the garden. I sipped my tea, feeling a quiet sense of accomplishment. Not in victory, not in retribution, but in the knowledge that growth, even when forced by mistakes, could take root. As the night approached, I whispered softly, "Keep going, Rachel. I am watching, but I believe you are learning." The house remained calm, secure, and alive with quiet energy. Outside, the world continued, unaware of the careful reconciliation unfolding. Inside, I felt the delicate balance of trust and caution settling between us, a bridge slowly being built, plank by careful plank. Over the following weeks, Rachel's efforts became more consistent. She no longer treated tasks as chores, but as responsibilities, an indication that her change was genuine. I noticed the subtle difference in how she moved through the world: careful gestures, attentive eyes, and a quiet respect for boundaries she had once ignored. One afternoon, she offered to help me in the kitchen. I hesitated for a moment. Sharing space after months of mistrust was not easy, but I nodded, observing closely as she washed vegetables and prepared ingredients. She worked silently, focused, never rushing, never assuming she knew better than I did. "You're doing well," I said softly, placing a tray of freshly baked bread on the counter. She looked up, a small, humble smile crossing her face. "Thank you, Aunt May. I want to do right," she replied. Her tone was steady, sincere. For the first time, I didn't detect a hint of entitlement, just honesty. The town began to notice her transformation more clearly. Neighbors spoke to me with cautious optimism. "She's genuinely trying," one remarked. Another added, "It's as if she's finally learning what responsibility means." Their words reinforced what I'd been observing firsthand. Rachel was slowly, carefully rebuilding herself. I allowed her small freedoms, within strict boundaries, to test her consistency. She watered the garden without supervision, organized the pantry, and occasionally ran minor errands. Each task she completed correctly reinforced my confidence in her change. I could see that the lessons from the smart lock, the police intervention, and her own reflection were taking root. Evenings became quieter, calmer. I often sat on the porch, sipping tea and watching Rachel work in the yard. There was a grace in her movements now, a measured respect I had never witnessed before. It reminded me that consequences, when faced and understood, can shape character more effectively than confrontation alone. I reflected on my own journey, too. The fear and betrayal had been real, but so was the wisdom gained. I had protected my home, set firm boundaries, and learned that patience and observation could teach lessons that harsh words never could. That night, as the stars appeared over the rooftops, I whispered softly, "You've come far, Rachel. Keep walking this path." The smart lock hummed gently, a silent sentinel watching over the home I had fought to protect. For the first time, I felt a fragile but undeniable peace. The niece who once schemed to steal my house was changing, and though full trust would take more time, the bridge between us had begun to form, steady, cautious, and real. By now, Rachel's changes were undeniable. Her humility and carefulness had become consistent, not just in isolated moments, but in her daily actions. I found myself considering a new step, granting her more responsibility in small ways, a test of whether her growth was genuine or simply a phase. I allowed her to manage small household tasks independently, tending the garden without supervision, fetching supplies, and organizing minor areas of the house. Each time, I observed quietly from a distance, letting her demonstrate the lessons she had learned. The smart lock still hummed softly, a silent guardian, but the tension in the house had eased. Rachel approached these tasks with a newfound confidence tempered by care. Gone was the impulsive recklessness of the past. In its place was thoughtfulness and respect. She paused to consider her actions, double-checked her work, and consistently acted within the boundaries I had established. One afternoon, while watering the flowers, she paused to glance toward the house, seemingly aware of the lessons she had internalized. I watched from the porch, noting the subtle changes, the slight straightening of her posture, the quiet concentration in her movements. This was not performative, it was genuine. Neighbors continued to notice the difference as well. Whispers turned to quiet admiration. "She's really turning around," one remarked. "Seems like she's finally taking responsibility." I didn't need their validation, but it was comforting to see that her transformation extended beyond my observation. Inside, I reflected on the journey we had traveled together. Betrayal had tested my patience, resilience, and understanding of human nature. Rachel's growth reminded me that consequences, time, and clear boundaries could reshape character more effectively than anger or punishment ever could. That evening, I invited her to join me for tea on the porch. We spoke lightly without mentioning past betrayals. She listened attentively, responded thoughtfully, and for the first time, our interaction felt natural rather than cautious. There was a tentative trust forming, built slowly on consistent behavior rather than words. As the sun set, casting golden light over the garden, I realized that patience and vigilance had borne fruit. Rachel was learning, not just to act responsibly, but to understand why boundaries exist and why trust must be earned. I whispered softly to myself, "You've proven you can follow the rules, Rachel. Now it's time to see if you can honor them even when I'm not watching." The house felt calm, secure, and filled with quiet possibility. For the first time in months, I sensed that the relationship between us could move beyond fear and suspicion toward something cautious but genuine, a bond tempered by lessons, patience, and resilience. The final test of Rachel's transformation approached quietly, without fanfare. I decided to give her a responsibility that would reveal the depth of her change, a task that required both trust and self-awareness. I asked her to help prepare the house for a small dinner I was hosting for neighbors, allowing her to move freely through the kitchen and dining area under my soft supervision. She accepted without hesitation, her usual nervousness replaced with focused care. Every movement was deliberate, setting the table, arranging flowers, and ensuring everything was neat and tidy. She checked herself twice, paused to adjust details, and asked politely before making decisions. This was not the impulsive, entitled niece of months ago. It was someone learning the value of respect and boundaries. I observed silently, sipping tea in the living room. Each task she completed correctly reinforced my belief that her changes were real. She was learning that actions had consequences, that responsibility demanded attention, and that trust was not a right, but a privilege to be earned. Neighbors arrived, praising the atmosphere and noting the care evident in every detail. Rachel smiled quietly, gracious without arrogance, moving through the room with an ease that suggested genuine pride in her work. Her behavior reflected humility and awareness, a stark contrast to the scheming niece who had once plotted to take my home. Later, as I watched her clear the dishes and organize the kitchen, I felt a deep sense of satisfaction, not in vengeance or triumph, but in witnessing growth. Patience, foresight, and careful planning had brought us to this point, a place where change was tangible and trust could cautiously expand. That night, after the neighbors had left and the house was quiet, I sat on the porch, the hum of the smart lock in the background a familiar reassurance. Rachel joined me briefly, offering a soft smile. No words were needed. Her steady presence and respectful demeanor spoke volumes. I realized that the lessons of the past months had not been in vain. Rachel had confronted consequences, reflected on her actions, and demonstrated that trust could indeed be rebuilt with care, effort, and humility. The niece who had once threatened my home was no longer the same person. As the stars began to twinkle above the rooftops, I whispered softly, "You've come far, Rachel. The trust you've earned is fragile, but real. Keep walking this path." For the first time in months, the house felt entirely peaceful. My home was secure, my boundaries respected, and the niece I had feared I'd lost had begun to reclaim herself in a responsible, measured, and sincere way. The final lesson had been learned, not by confrontation, but by observation, patience, and the quiet power of foresight. And as I closed my eyes that night, I knew that the future, cautiously but truly, held promise for both of us. Spring had fully returned, and my garden bloomed with vibrant colors, a testament to patience, care, and resilience. The roses, lavender, and small vegetables thrived, mirroring the growth I had witnessed in Rachel over the past months. Rachel had changed in ways I had once doubted possible. Her boldness and entitlement had been replaced by humility, attentiveness, and respect for boundaries. She no longer approached my home with schemes in mind. Instead, she occasionally offered help with small tasks, always asking permission, never assuming access or authority. That morning, I found her carefully tending the flower beds. She glanced up, smiled shyly, and continued her work without intrusion. I stepped onto the porch, cane in hand, and watched her, feeling a quiet pride. This was the niece I had feared I'd lost, the niece who had once plotted to take my home. But now, she was learning responsibility, respect, and the weight of consequences. We sat together for tea, talking about simple things: the weather, the garden, the neighbor's new kittens. There was no mention of the past betrayal. It no longer needed to be spoken. The trust between us had been rebuilt slowly, brick by brick, through consistent action and careful observation. "I never thought I'd be able to earn this," Rachel said softly. "Not just your trust, but my own confidence in doing the right thing." I smiled, placing a hand over hers. "Trust is like a garden," I said gently. "It grows slowly, needs care, and sometimes it survives storms. You've weathered yours well." The town had noticed too. Whispers of approval replaced skepticism. Rachel's reputation, once tarnished by her ambition and recklessness, had begun to shift. People saw her effort, her humility, and her dedication to change. Inside, the house felt alive with calm energy. The smart lock hummed softly, a silent reminder of boundaries that had been set and respected. My home was secure, my life intact, and the lessons of the past months had left their mark not just on Rachel, but on me as well. I had learned the power of vigilance, patience, and quiet justice. As the sun set, casting a golden glow over the porch and garden, I realized the journey was complete. Betrayal, fear, and caution had given way to responsibility, humility, and cautious trust. The niece I had once feared might be lost forever was now walking a new path, guided by the lessons she had learned and tempered by respect and understanding. I sipped my tea, feeling peace settle over me like a soft blanket. The past was behind us, the lessons etched deeply, and the future stretched ahead, full of careful hope. And in that moment, I knew that while fear and betrayal had tested me, love, measured, protected, and wise, had endured. And it had won.